Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Captive Audience. It's Fantastic Friday. I know you're used to seeing me on Wonderful Wednesday, but today is going to be Fantastic Friday. And the reason I'm here is that Sunny caught a nasty flu bug. And so she had to miss this past Wednesday. And so I ran that one. And she's missing the Friday today as well. So I'm standing in for her on Friday. So hopefully I can be at least half as good as when we're both together. So I'm going to do my best. So feel free to chime in with any comments you have along the way, because when I see your comments, that lets me know that you're actually able to hear me and that things are going smoothly. So that said, let me just jump right in. There's a ton of stuff going on, as there always is. And while this may not be the longest of these podcasts that we do, there are so many interesting things going on right now that I think you'll find this to be one of the more interesting ones. So I thought what I would start with is this is another shameless plug for the dad rants. You'll look in the chats there and you'll see a link to my most recent Substack article. And this one is entitled something along the lines of The Moral Case for Communism Socialism. And the reason I wrote this one is that there are so many people. I hear theologians all the time, and no one seems to give a defense of capitalism or to give a case for the moral reasons why socialism fails. So, hey, Lori, thank you so much for that comment. Happy Friday to you as well. But the reason I thought this would be such an interesting topic is when you're out there doing what I call apologetics and explaining and debating with people, you need to have some core points that you can make to explain why these certain topics of the day, which were probably pretty obvious to us being in the generation that most of us in this podcast are on, would get, but the younger generation just doesn't have it. So I thought I'd put together this rant entitled the moral case against communism and socialism." So the basic question you start with is, why does communism fail? Every place it's tried, every country, every language, every continent, it's been not just a failure, but a massive failure. And it's one thing to fail, but it's another thing to wind up murdering somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million people over the course of a 100-year period. It has been an absolute disaster. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why do people keep bringing this up? It's like it's an idea that just refuses to die. And I think the reason it refuses to die is that the generations that follow us have not been taught basic history, because if they knew it, then they wouldn't do it, right? So we literally even done things like run, I call it a clinical trial, a side-by-side comparison. So you can't blame it on different cultures or different continents for the reason that it didn't work. Literally, we had two cases where we split a country in half, same language, same people, uh, free market economics on the one side, socialism, communism on the other side, and you're able to see the result. The first of those trials was West Germany versus East Germany, split in half at the end of World War II. And at the end of 40 years, the experiment ended because East Germany was so obviously a complete and utter disaster. Same language, same culture, same people. And the thing was, is that it was such a bad disaster that they had to build a wall. They had to have dogs on the side of the wall, people in prison guards in uniform with machine guns to keep people from trying to get out. That's how bad East Germany was, an utter and total failure. The other side by side comparison that was done over that same time period, and it continues to this day, is after World War II, we split South Korea and North Korea in two, the South being capitalist, the North being communist. And what's the result of that then? South Korea is now, I think, like ranked the 10th or 12th biggest country in terms of GDP in the world. Its products and its companies are known all over the world for exceptional excellence. South Korea has been nothing but a shining and phenomenal success. North Korea, on the other hand, is basically an armed prison camp. 20 million citizens that are living in such bad shape that the country has to import food from capitalist countries just to feed the people. So those are just the results of communism, and socialism, why it fails. But that doesn't get to the heart of, I think, why it fails. And the reason it fails is this anti-human nature. And I'm just going to use what I call the the seven deadly vices versus the seven heavenly virtues. The seven deadly vices are all encouraged by communism, socialism. Well, six of the seven. And I'll start with number one. Number one is pride, the king of the vices. And it's all about, at the end of the day, narcissism. Everything in communism is about me getting stuff, which leads directly to vice number two, which is envy. Envy is all about who got what. And when you look at the news, what do you see? There's no conversations around the quality of a person from a morality standpoint or any of that. It's all about somebody's got more than I got. Since they got more than I got, they got it unfairly. And since they got it unfairly, I have a right to take it from them. And I probably have a right to take their life in the process of doing that, which leads to vice number three, which is wrath. So, wrath is the first of these vices that manifests into actual physical action. And what do you see? You see violence in the streets everywhere, all driven by this communist mindset. After that, you have sloth. One of the things about communism, socialism, it rewards sloth. And I think about those times when I've been in, I'll use those college work study groups. There's five of us in a group. I'm sure you've all seen this in your workplaces over the course of your career. If there's five people in a group, there's going to be one or two people who work really hard, two more people who coast, and then there's one who's going to absolutely, if you put a gun to their head, they're not going to do a thing. So it rewards that person. They get the benefit of everybody else doing the work and them not doing anything. So it actually rewards the vice of sloth. One of the reasons why that the original Pilgrims almost failed and starved to death, I think, was Governor Bradford when he got to Plymouth Rock. First year, they split everything evenly, and they almost starved to death because you had people who wouldn't do anything unless a gun was to their head. After that, that next year, they split everything into private plots, and then you get what you eat what you make, and the thing flourished and went on from there. And you see this all over the world. So that is a one of the primary reasons is it punishes diligence, it punishes the virtue of diligence, and it rewards the diligence of sloth. And that is one of the primary reasons why socialism and communism fails everywhere that it's tried. Greed. Now, here's the thing about greed. You first have to define greed because everybody wants to talk about how greedy the capitalist is or some rich guy and how they got all this money or how they bought this giant house and all those kinds of things. But here's how they define greed in the dictionary. So the popular definition is greed is the selfish, intense and selfish desire for something. I think that's not quite right. A better definition for greed is the intense and selfish desire for something that you didn't earn. That's really important to add on because if you look at these people protesting and running around in the streets, they have the intense and selfish desire for something. But what they don't have is an intense and selfish desire to go work for it. Right? They're all envious of what other people have, but they never sit back and realize that person that built that business, they're not looking at the 80-hour weeks they put in. They're not looking at the two divorces that they went through in order to get that business going. They're not looking at the two or three bankruptcies they had to go through in order to make that happen. They're not seeing any of that stuff. All they're seeing is what somebody else has. They're not looking at the work that they put in because trust me, they don't want to put in the work. They want somebody to hand it to them, which really is just theft. And that's exactly at the end of the day. One of the biggest reasons communism fails is people don't like things being stolen from them. And that's precisely how that system works. And finally, it's the vice of gluttony, which I'll define as most people think of it as just eating too much, of which I am guilty, right? But it's much bigger than that. Gluttony is the unrestricted, uncontrollable consumption, just the need to consume stuff. If you look around you, that's what you see. People just want to have stuff for the sake of having stuff. Life is much more important than that. So these are the principal reasons why I think communism and socialism fail is because it rewards vice and it punishes virtue. The reason why capitalism is successful is because it rewards virtue and punishes vice. And that was a rant I think I wrote last week, if you want to take a look at that. So I thought that'd be a great way to start. Hopefully you all enjoyed that and hopefully read that and hopefully it'll be a little bit more articulate when you have those discussions with people around the morality of capitalism. This is a great segue to go into, I think, the Golden Dome missile defense. And I'm sure some of you have heard this from President Trump. I'm going to just put this in here too. Here's an article about that. So for anybody who's been around more than a few decades, this might all sound familiar. So let's do a little walk through history. And this is one of the reasons why I think history is so cool. I think it was Mark Twain who said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And this is one of these cases where it rhymes. So let's go back to the 80s. In the 80s, we had the Cold War going on. Our big nemesis back then was the Soviet Union. And Reagan came along and proposed that we do the SDI, or the Space Defense Initiative. Now, you remember, people came along and the left mocked it and called it Star Wars and said it was impossible. It couldn't be done. Why, we could never make missiles that would shoot down other missiles. Oh, that'll be too expensive. and all the other excuses they had against it. Now, I remember at that time, the Soviet Union was spending somewhere in the neighborhood of around 30% of their gross domestic product on defense. We were spending around 6%. So basically, what Reagan did, and I'm sure these conversations happen behind closed doors, but basically, we're going to destroy them without firing a shot because we're going to economically bury them. So the Soviet Union recognized Gorbachev at the time. We've been spending a fortune on all of these missiles, and overnight, Reagan's going to make all of that obsolete with this SDI initiative. So, in order to open up the economy so they could compete, they began to open up the economy. The Soviet Union saw what the citizens began to see what freedom looks like. They got wind of that, and the whole thing collapsed. And that's how the Soviet Union came to the end, was with the Space Defense Initiative. Now, fast forward 40 years, here we are again, and this time we're calling it the Global Shield. And what Trump is basically proposing is that we do a global shield, kind of like the Space Defense Initiative, over the entire of North America. And once again, the left is making the same arguments that they made 40 years ago. Oh, it's impossible. Oh, we can't do it. Oh, it'll be too expensive. I mean, it's like hilarious. And Israel already has the system that we created. They're already shooting down missiles, which, by the way, 40 years ago, they said was impossible, by the way. We know it's possible. We know if we put our energy into it, we can make that happen. Just like when JFK said, let's get on the moon by 1969, and we got it by 1970, and we got it done. Same thing applies here. This totally can be done. In fact, this looks like an easier thing to accomplish than that, because we know we can shoot missiles down already. It's just a question of building a system big enough to cover the entire continent. Now, here's the thing that's just so rich about this. So the Chinese are already commenting and saying things like, it'll be destabilizing. This is the same thing that Gorbachev and the Russians said back 40 years ago. Of course, they don't want us to do it, because what that means is all of the money that the CCP has been pouring into defense is overnight going to be obsolete. It'll be meaningless. And this is just another way to essentially bury that country, force them to open up to more capitalism, more freedom. People see the freedom, and then they're going to turn that government over. It's another way to squeeze them, just like the tariffs are just another way to squeeze them as well. This is that asymmetrical warfare that we talk about. This is just another tool of asymmetrical warfare, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I think we're going to get the same result. They can't continue to exist like this. They can't spend 30% of their GDP. They got no consumer economy. They can't do it. And they're going to have to change something. And that change is going to be a change in government, hopefully a change in the type of government, which would be in the best interest of not just us and the rest of the world, but in the best interest of the Chinese citizens too. So it's really the merciful thing to do. So it's the moral thing to do. So stay tuned. That's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I thought the next thing that was very interesting was the South African president's visit to the White House. And the amazing thing about this is he actually, Trump didn't invite him to come to the White House. He asked to be invited to the White House and came. I think his reason was he thought he could explain how nice they were being to whites in South Africa, and that it was all lies, and that maybe they can get out of having these 25% tariffs levied against them. And one thing you can say a lot of things about Trump, but one thing you can say for sure is he's absolutely savage. I mean, I love the fact that he will tell people exactly what he thinks. No diplomatic speak. There's no arguing about what he's trying to get across. And if you all saw that room when he had them dim the lights and he showed the South African president the actual speeches by members of his party calling for the destruction of white citizens, there's no getting around it. And if you've been following any of the press on that, I mean, they're literally killing farmers in South Africa right now. And they just passed a law, which this guy signed, which essentially says they can expropriate property from white South Africans. Now, this is another one of those things where, once again, history repeats itself. If you know anything about history, you remember Idi Amin over in Uganda back in the 70s, when his economy was absolutely collapsing due to his policies. One of the strategies that tyrants always put into place is they do something to take people's attention away from them and then put the blame on someone else. So in the case of Idi Amin, he simply blamed the Indians, who were successful business people. I'm talking about subcontinent Indians who lived in India, rather Uganda, who were successful business people, and he blamed them for their worries, for their travails. And basically, the Ugandans ran those people out of the country and caused the country's economy to collapse even faster. So the people who were actually running businesses, actually do a great job, actually employing people, you run them out of the country. And eventually, all they've done is they've delayed the collapse. Same thing with the Soviet Union, with the kulaks in Ukraine in the 30s. The successful farmers, the people who were actually feeding the country because of the poor economic performance in the Soviet Union, uh, Stalin needed to have a scapegoat. He made the scapegoat the kulaks in the Ukraine. So he confiscated their property, murdered the kulaks, and caused basically a starvation. 6 million people starved to death in the Ukraine. So this is the strategy employed all the time. And sad to say it, but I don't see how that is going to be avoided in South Africa. That probably headed down that same path as Uganda. Hopefully, not as severe as what we saw in the Ukraine in the 30s, but probably the best thing for white South Africans to do. I hate to say it, is to get out before they start murdering them. I mean, they're already murdering them, but before they go full scale slaughter on it. But it's a sad thing, but it's a great thing to see that Trump has actually extended the olive branch to and granted asylum to these South African citizens. In this case, this is true political asylum. And of course, the left is losing their mind because asylum should only be granted to people of color, apparently, and not granted to white people, which again, that's how divisive that party is. Nothing new under the sun. More on that a little bit later. So again, something else to just know about them. Um, it's just a horrendous thing. Um, then, of course, there's the big beautiful bill, and I think it passed the House. I wasn't able to pay a whole lot of attention to today, the things that have happened today, being tied up with grandchildren and the like. But that by itself means it was a great day for me. But the big beautiful sort of advances to the House. Well, I think it passed the House. Now it's waiting for the Senate. But I thought some of the things that are in it that are so cool to see is the repeal of the $500 billion Green New Deal. That is like some of the best. That's music to my ears. That is a jobs killer. It's a nation killer. It's a waste of money. And I'm so glad to see that we're repealing that. A ban on taxpayer funded gender transition procedures. Um, just destroying the social fabric. We should not be paying for that. If people want to do it, it's on them. We ought not be supporting that. The elimination of federal funding for Planned Parenthood and expansion of school choice. Needless to say, Planned Parenthood, if you want to do that, then do it on your own, but we're not going to participate in it and steal from your fellow citizens to have you do something that's immoral. If you want to do something that's immoral, pay for it in your own dime. And of course, we should do everything we can to give women the rationale for why it's in their best interest to not do that, of course. So that I thought was really great news. It makes me really optimistic that we're on the brink of a massive economic boom, given these changes, what's going to pass with this bill. Because I think also included in that bill are things like no tax on tips, um, no tax on Social Security if you make less than some amount. I think it's like 150,000. Can you imagine if that passes, what that would do? That's a generational moving change. I mean, Democrats will be out of power for the next 40 years if that should pass. So keep your fingers crossed. It's good morning in America, as Ronald Reagan would say. We're on the brink of the morning. Well, here was another thing that's recently come up, and this is the Health and Human Services revoking funding for Harvard University. And I can't tell you again, these things just bring a smile to my lips. I am so glad that somebody's finally fighting the fight. The first thing you have to ask yourself is, why are we funding Harvard University? They got a multi-billion-dollar endowment anyway. So why in the world would we be doing that? Why are we taking money from poor kids in the center of the country and giving it to the rich kids on the East Coast so they can go to Harvard? It makes absolutely no sense. And that should be done anyway. But when you layer on these other things that Harvard's been doing, in this case, the Homeland Security has revoked the certification for Harvard University's foreign student admissions program. So it prohibits the school from enrolling international students. And there's very good reason for this, because what the school's been doing is bringing in international students who then get on campus and raise hell, basically anti-Semitic, fostering violence, coordinating the Chinese Communist Party right on campus. So it's like inviting somebody to your house and they destroy your house. No other country in the world will put up with this, and we shouldn't either. And I think it is a great thing that we eject these. It's bad enough. We have enough problems with our own homegrown nut jobs, but to be inviting them from another country is absolutely insane. And you look at what's happened with this anti-Semitic behavior, which is occurring on campuses like Cornell, Harvard, you name the school, and eventually it's going to result in increased violence. And sure enough, what do we have? Just the other day, the assassination of the Israeli embassy. And you can't tell me for 1 second that these events are tied. We've made it okay. We keep allowing these people to say these incredibly filthy things in public and protest on these universities on our dime. And now it's resulted in the loss of life for these two beautiful kids. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous. And it gives you a look into the immorality of our enemy. This person walked up and shot these two people in the back, and then when they were on the ground, continued to shoot them until they didn't move anymore, and then started shouting something like "Free Palestine." That we allow people like this in our country is shame on us. And yes, that's happened. We should do everything we can in order to prevent that from happening in the future. And one of them is just not letting them in, kicking the ones here that are here already here out, shutting down these universities' funding that bring these people here. I mean, all of those things have to happen. And you looked at the leftist violence that's occurred over the last 6 months, and it's all leftist violence. They tried to burn down the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania with his family inside. The burning down of Tesla dealerships, that's been going on. The assassination of an insurance executive, where the man was just shot in cold blood, and then the left celebrates the shooting of this guy. This is the morality of the left. By any means necessary is their standard phrase, and they're certainly executing on that. We got to believe them when they say that, right? Because obviously they're doing exactly what they said they would do. So, really important stuff, and very sad that happened. But the good news that should come out of this is it gives us more ammunition to say, we got to put a stop to this. And I'm so glad to see we have an administration that has the backbone to make that happen. And the last one I thought I would cover today, because I think this is one of these hidden things that a lot of people aren't aware of or know much about. And that's the writ of habeas corpus. And I want to walk you through what the habeas corpus is, and forgive me if you already know it, and then a little bit of the history of the habeas corpus and why I think, and this is the result of a rant that I just wrote, so I sent you a link to that. This might be the harbinger of the next constitutional crisis, and I mean a true constitutional crisis. So that said, let's walk back on the writ of habeas corpus. So what the writ is essentially it's a legal document that basically says that you can't hold a person without having evidence for why you're holding. You got to present the evidence for why you're holding that person. So habeas corpus in Latin literally means bring the body. That is, bring the person before a magistrate so we can look at the evidence and see if we have enough evidence to keep the person. If we don't have enough evidence to keep them, then we should release them. Now, if you've grown up in the United States over the last 100, 200 years, you take that for granted. Nobody even questions that. But recognize that's not true in most of the world. They can throw your butt in a dungeon and that's it until they feel like it. And that's what used to happen in Great Britain and other countries around the world. And that's why the writ was developed. It has its genesis in the, I can't think of Magna Carta in like 1217, which I think was where it first originated. So moving forward to current events. So I'm going to get in a circle back in a moment as to why that's so important. The American Constitution codified the writ in Article 1, Section 9, where it basically states the writ shall not be suspended except in cases of invasion or rebellion or where the public safety requires it. Now keep that in mind. The Biden administration just let in 10 to 20 million illegals. We don't even know how many exactly, which tells you something. Many of them are criminals. We don't know how many of them are terrorists. Trump was elected on the mandate to remove these illegal aliens. Now, since then, many of the lower courts have done everything they can with these leftist judges, which were installed by Democrats, to block their removal by saying Trump is violating the writ of habeas corpus. In other words, these people are being kicked out of the country without due process. So if you look at the Constitution, the question becomes, do we have a rebellion? Do we have an invasion? If the answer to those two questions are yes, Trump is operating within his constitutional right to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. My sense is this is definitely going to wind up at the Supreme Court. But the bottom line is, do we have time to wait for that? We know the Democrat strategy is basically to run out the clock till the midterms and see if they can win the House back. So that's basically their strategy, is to keep blocking these initiatives and keep as many illegals in the country as possible. So fortunately, there is precedent for this. And one of the biggest precedents is Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln had to suspend the writ during because the Democrat South, you notice I'm not saying the South and the North, the Democrat South was inciting rebellion leading up to the Civil War. And just to give you a sense for how much rebellion they were inciting, in November of 1859, Abraham Lincoln was elected. By December, South Carolina has seceded from the Union. By January, I think 6 more states had seceded from the Union. And by March, 11 states had seceded from the Union. Now, in those days, the president didn't begin his oath of office and actually become president until March. So he's elected in November. He doesn't get into office until March. So that was the situation that Abraham Lincoln inherited from the worst president in history, which is President Buchanan. But Biden definitely giving him a run for his money, as we can see. So in March, he inherits a country that's already in open rebellion. Think about the location of Washington, D.C. Maryland and Virginia both border Washington, D.C. Both of those states were slave states. Virginia actually seceded from the Union. Maryland didn't. So you had all kinds of spies going back and forth. There were all kinds of conspiracy theories. In fact, one of them was President Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the South, Democrat South, who were pro-slavery, put together a conspiracy or actually entertained a conspiracy to kidnap Lincoln. That's how dangerous things were at the time. And this is more background to that. Those same conspirators that never put into motion the plan to kidnap Lincoln wound up 5 years later assassinating Lincoln. Now, that's a whole other story. A lot of people don't realize that. But so Lincoln's life was in danger. The capital was in danger. You had rebel states on the border. All of that was going on. So the question was, did Lincoln have enough rebellion going on to suspend the writ of habeas corpus and catch these spies and catch these people who were anti-union and throw them in jail? And so he suspended the writ and threw those people in prison without due process. And guess what the president at the time? They called Lincoln traitor. They called Lincoln dictator. They called Lincoln tyrant. They did everything but call him Hitler. And the only reason they didn't call him Hitler was because Hitler wasn't born yet. So does any of this sound familiar? So this is the strategy the leftists want to put into place. They want to force Trump to actually have to suspend the writ so they can call him tyrant and traitor, which is and dictator. And Hitler. That's what they've been wanting to do this entire time. If he suspends the writ because they forced him to suspend the writ, that puts him in a position to do that. But here's the thing: do we have a rebellion? We have courts rebelling against the Constitution by not letting the president exercise his executive right to bring and the mandate given by the people to get these illegals out of the country. So they're in open rebellion right there. Certain rebellion against the Constitution. Are they violent? Well, they've already had 2 attempts on the president's life. Sounds like the same thing Lincoln went through. The only difference is in Lincoln's case, they were successful. In Trump's case, they haven't been successful yet, but they definitely made those attempts. Look at the riots that are going on. I think there's probably been 10, 15 riots that have occurred around the election of Trump, definitely back in 2016. And you look at what we just described in terms of the evil of the left. They've assassinated the insurance company executive, and the left cheers that on. This young couple's got assassinated in Washington, D.C., the anti-Semite raid. The left's been encouraging this kind of stuff on the campuses, this kind of violence. The Tesla leaderships and the constant burning of those, the attempted assassination of the governor of Pennsylvania, where they burned his house down. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of other stuff, but I would suggest that Trump faces a situation at least as dangerous as Lincoln faced back in 1860 when he suspended the writ. And I think that we're going to get to a point where he's going to have to suspend the writ. I don't know if the Supreme Court can be counted on. Yes, we think they're conservative, but we got a couple of people in that Supreme Court who I don't know what's going on with them. I don't know what's going on with Amy Barrett. I don't know what's going on with Roberts, but I would not count on them to do the right thing. So Trump may have to do it. And one more thing from a historical perspective that makes this so interesting: uh, after Trump suspended the writ, Roger B. Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court back then, actually went and reversed his suspension of the writ. And Lincoln's reaction was to just ignore him. And I think that we might wind up with a case like that. The Supreme Court does not have any power or authority to dictate anything. Of the three branches of the government, they're co-equal branches, but the two that are superior are the legislative and the executive. And this is one of those cases where where Lincoln ignored them. And my sense is that Trump is going to have to do the same because it's his mission. The chief executive's key role is to save the country, and that's what Lincoln did, and that's what Trump is likely going to have to do. One last aside, because I think it's just so interesting from a historical perspective. Roger B. Taney, who said that everybody deserved due process. It should be illegal to hold a man in bondage unless they have due process. This is the same Supreme Court justice, mind you, who signed the infamous Dred Scott decision, which basically said that blacks could be held in bondage because they're subhuman. These are literally his words, because they are subhuman and they can be held in bondage. So the irony blows my mind. The ability of a Democrat, and he was a Democrat, of course, to hold two opposing views in their head at the same time absolutely blows my mind. But yet they are capable of doing that, and they've always been capable of doing that. A couple of last other items. The writ was suspended by President Grant. I think it had to do with Reconstruction and the Democrat-controlled KKK going through and keeping black people from voting. Seeing a common theme here. Roosevelt suspended the writ and threw Japanese citizens in jail in concentration camps during World War II. So, what is it about minorities in the Democrat Party, by the way? I just thought I'd throw that out there. So, there, sports fans, is my discussion or rant for the night, if you will. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope you walk away feeling more educated and feeling more articulate than you were coming into this. And I enjoy working with you all and talking to you all, and it keeps me sharp. So you all have a great weekend, and God bless America. Take care. Good night now.